Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Mhm.
I've been seeing so many people online talking about emergency preparedness lately,
Mhm.
and it's got me thinking, like, yeah, everyone's got a checklist, right?
Right.
But are those checklists really working for everyone? Our brains are all wired so differently, and honestly, traditional emergency plans, they often miss the mark, especially when it comes to neurodiversity.
Absolutely. This is something that's often overlooked, but it's so incredibly important. And you're right, those standard checklists, they just don't cut it. It's like telling someone to grab their go bag and run when they're
Right.
experiencing sensory overload. It just doesn't compute.
It's like trying to think straight in the middle of a sensory hurricane. That's why I'm so glad we're doing this deep dive today, because we're going way beyond the usual advice. We're talking sensory-first emergency planning.
Exactly. And that's what the research really highlighted, the importance of a sensory first approach, you know?
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, an emergency situation is already chaotic
Oh,
enough.
absolutely.
Then you add in sensory sensitivities, and it can be completely overwhelming.
Everything's amplified, right?
Exactly. So instead of just focusing on the logistics, we need to be thinking about how to manage that sensory input.
So it's not just about having a go bag, it's about what's in the go bag.
Yes. And it's about having a plan that considers everyone's sensory needs.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the research talked about using visual checklists instead of written instructions.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because in a crisis, trying to process written information when you're already overloaded, that can be really, really tough.
Especially for someone with, say, dyslexia or ADHD, right?
Mhm.
Where focusing on text is already a challenge, and then you add in the stress of an emergency. It's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. But a visual checklist, that can be a game changer.
It's giving your brain the information it needs in a way that it can actually process it, which is key in a crisis.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the visual stuff either. Think about someone who's hypersensitive to sound.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Sirens, alarms, people shouting. You can't even imagine.
Right, it would be completely debilitating. And that's where something like noise-canceling headphones, which you might not think of as an emergency essential,
Right.
they become absolutely crucial.
It's about creating that little bubble of calm in the middle of chaos.
Right, exactly. A way to filter out some of that sensory overload and regain a sense of control.
Which is so important in those moments.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the big things either.
Right.
This whole idea of a sensory-friendly first aid kit really jumped out at me.
Yes.
Because we always think about bandages and antiseptic, but this is next level.
It is. It's genius, right?
Right.
Because a traditional first aid kit, it addresses physical injuries, which are obviously important.
Of course.
But a sensory-friendly kit, that's about preventing a meltdown before it even happens.
Okay, so break it down for me. What kind of things are we talking about here?
So you've got your basics, of course, like earplugs, because even if you don't have noise-canceling headphones, just being able to block out some of that extra noise can be huge.
Huge.
Yeah,
And it's such a small thing to carry.
exactly. Then there are things like weighted blankets or those weighted lap pads.
Oh, I love those. The
Yeah.
deep pressure is so calming.
Right, it's like a big hug. And then you've got fidget toys, which can be surprisingly helpful for sensory regulation.
They're not just for kids either.
Yeah.
I know plenty of adults who swear by them.
Absolutely. And then, this might seem simple, but having familiar foods and drinks on hand.
Oh, it's so smart. It's about maintaining a little bit of normalcy in a really abnormal situation, right?
Exactly. That sense of routine, even if it's just having your favorite juice box, it can be so grounding.
It's like a little touchstone to remind you of home. And speaking of things that are good to have at home,
Yes.
the research also talked about the importance of having all your crucial documents organized.
No, that is so important.
And not just organized, but accessible, right?
Right.
Like, what if your phone dies and you need medical information during an evacuation?
Yeah.
Having physical copies in your go bag could literally be a lifesaver.
Absolutely. And don't forget about digital copies, too.
Oh, right, because two is one and one is none, right?
Yeah.
Always have a backup.
Exactly. Back everything up.
Speaking of being prepared,
Mm-hmm.
the research was really big on practicing those emergency plans.
Oh, yes. And this is where it gets really interesting because it's not just about knowing what to do in your head.
It's about muscle memory.
Exactly. It's about practicing those escape routes, practicing how to use your sensory tools so that when the pressure's on.
You don't even have to think about it.
Exactly.
It's like that fight or flight response kicks in, and if you've practiced, you're more likely to respond in a way that keeps you and your loved ones safe. And I think that's what's so important about all of this, right? It's not just about surviving an emergency. It's about getting through it with less stress and anxiety, which is huge for everyone, but especially for neurodiverse individuals.
It's about thriving, not just surviving. And the cool thing is, these principles of sensory-first planning, they don't just apply to emergencies.
Ooh, I like where you're going with this.
Think about a trip to the doctor's office, a crowded concert, even just a change in your daily routine.
All those things can be challenging for sure.
Right. But if you approach them with that same sensory-first mindset, it can make a world of difference.
That is such a good point to end on. So to sum up this awesome deep dive, emergency preparedness isn't one size fits all. We need to think about sensory needs, create plans that work for everyone, and practice, practice, practice. And the coolest part, these strategies can help us navigate all kinds of challenges, not just emergencies.
Absolutely.
Until next time, everyone, stay curious.